about the car industry. We just learned that car sales are still way down in the United States. That's the September report that just came out in October. And by the way, they're down all throughout Europe as well. And car sales are also down in developed countries. And they're down in developing countries. Honda is down, Toyota is down, GM is down, you name it. By the way, sales are down in Japan and in India and even in China. The fact is, the global auto market is shrinking. The numbers were down in 2018. They're down, as we just mentioned, right now in 2019. And Moody's has just put out a report projecting it's going to be in decline in 2020. Is that possible? That this is simply, well, you know, those things happen. It's a temporary trend. We're just going through something these last couple of years? No. No. In fact, the Wall Street Journal and others are now reporting that we have actually hit something that is called peak car. Peak car. Loosely defined, peak car means that the world has essentially reached the point where it finally has pretty much all the cars that it needs. Think about that. In our lifetime, your lifetime and my lifetime, the auto industry saturation level may have finally been reached. But how'd that happen? How is it happening? And what are the trends that are causing this to happen? I think it's a fascinating story. We've got this covered for you. It's the type of story, it's like a paradigm shift that you're not going to see anywhere else. But right here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we truly believe, we do, that it's time to do news again. Okay, here we go. This is the list. You look forward to it every night. We know you do. The questions we think you'll be asking tomorrow. Is the auto industry actually shrinking worldwide for the first time in a century? Is it hypocritical that lawmakers who generally ignore all wars are suddenly concerned about Syria? And why does China allow Hong Kong youth to be indoctrinated in what is essentially self-hate? These are all fascinating topics, but we're going to kick off our A block with this remarkable worldwide phenomenon that seems to suggest not only that the car industry is shrinking, but that in fact it's reached its peak. In other words, the era that most of us grew up in, where everybody had to have a car here in the United States, and then after everyone had a car, essentially here in the United States, we would make sure that everyone everywhere else all over the world would also have a car. Well, guess what? That ain't gonna happen. Not like that, anyway. And joining us now is the co-host of Boom Bust here on RT America, who spent the better part of the day actually researching and working on this story. Christy I, good enough to join us now. Christy, so glad you're here. Help us understand this. This is a huge trend that we're looking at. And it makes sense to most of us that maybe the saturation level has finally been reached in the United States. It's kind of an old story we've been talking about in the past. But is it possible that this is not just a U.S. trend, but a global trend?
Absolutely, and this is a highly debated subject because it's not necessarily that the market has reached a saturation point, it's the changing consumer behavior. That's the shift that we see in the industry right now, because right now people don't believe that car ownership is a necessity anymore. Ever since 1960, we always heard that every single family needs a car. That has been the trend. But in 2010, we actually saw the beginnings of a decline in car ownership. And that's actually no surprise, because in 2010, that's when ride sharing and ride hailing became mainstream. Apps such as Uber, Lyft, Grab taxis, those apps made it so that people can grab a taxi on demand, and that actually made car ownership a non-necessary purchase for the Y generation. So
this term that we're hearing people say, peak car, does not necessarily mean that everybody in the world who we expected would eventually go out and buy a car has now gone out and bought a car. No, it's something else, right? Something, I think, what do you call it?
It's a change in consumer behavior. It's a shift in sentiment. And you see now the technology industry is now encroaching upon the auto industry. And now they're introducing these things such as shared rides. And you also have this entire thing called the last mile segment, which Uber and Lyft are also pioneering. They're pioneering this concept of shared scooters, shared bikes, shared board.
So I'm going to stop you for a minute. That term you just used, the last mile, right? That's a new term that's being used to describe the way people are now getting around here in the United States. We see it here in Washington, D.C., where people don't necessarily need to have a car from door to door. They need a way to get someplace, and then from there they use a different type of getting around, right?
Exactly.
And that could be anything, right?
Exactly. A bike, a scooter, a skateboard, any of those things could, because you see technology, these electric vehicles, these very lightweight portable electric vehicles are now displacing the need to actually own a car, because you don't have to walk somewhere. You can pick up a bike from the street, you can pick up a scooter from the street, a shared vehicle, and take it to wherever you need to go. It makes the entire transportation of the last mile seamless.
And Americans are using that. And what's interesting is that this is a concept, or a trend, if you will, that Americans are now buying into. We see it in all the big cities in the United States. But this has developed in the developing countries long before that. Is that why? Because here's the thing about the auto industry. As I said at the beginning, we knew that the U.S. Auto industry was probably already saturated. But everybody thought, yeah, but wait till all those Chinese people start buying cars. Then we're going to be rolling in the dough. Wait till Vietnam. Wait till Korea. Wait till India. That's not happening.
Not at all, because China and India are drastically different markets. So all the car manufacturers and the entire auto industry, they bet very heavily on China and India because they saw this rise of middle class. They saw the rise of middle class from abject poverty, and they saw a lot of opportunity there. So the Chinese auto market actually increased fivefold from 2005, but then unexpectedly saw a decline in 2018. Now, according to all the forecasts, they weren't expecting the sector to fall so soon, to decline so quickly. They didn't expect to reach a saturation point so quickly. And the reason is because China and India have a different model. They live in a tightly compacted urban society, very different than what we see in North America here. And because of that, the mode of transportation is very different. People prefer lighter, smaller vehicles that can actually maneuver through traffic more efficiently, such as scooters, bikes, boards.
Gosh, what you're describing is a completely different paradigm. It's a paradigm shift in how we have always seen things and expected things would continue. And let me ask you a question as we run out of time. The average Joe watching this newscast right now, watching us, takes away what from this in terms of his lifestyle, in terms of maybe the next car he buys, and in terms of his job prospects?
Well, there's a lot of efficiencies to be had because the car ownership isn't necessary anymore. He can actually go and do ride sharing, last mile vehicle. That is actually dollars saved on not having to buy another vehicle. But if you absolutely do want to buy another vehicle, nowadays auto dealers are making it much more affordable for people to own cars because they're scrambling to capture that sale. They're making these affordable deals, affordable leases much more available to any average person.
And jobs, forget about it. Look somewhere else.
Exactly. The auto industry is contracting at a rapid rate, and analysts are forecasting for a 3% contraction by next year.
Christy I, nobody does it better. You took us through it. We understand it, and it really does seem like something is changing in our world, and I'm glad you were able to help us figure it out. Thanks so much.